All right, welcome back to Stone Rain, our comprehensive introduction to Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for sticking through that first video, the first part of the video. Um, I hope that you guys have a good understanding of the different card types that exist in Magic the Gathering, the basis of the game itself. Now I want to take that information from the first video, all those different card types, and talk about how the game is played. This should be a much more straightforward video now that we have all that information. So, from a very basic standpoint, we are going to have a deck of magic cards. We'll look at the formats a little bit later to see how many cards are in that deck, but every game of Magic is going to start off. Each player is going to have a certain number of life points, and everybody will draw 7 cards from their shuffled up library of cards, and we're going to take turns going back and forth and playing cards from our hand, from our library, and trying to reduce our opponent's life total to 0. So, give you a basic look here at what we can do in a turn of Magic. So, you're going to start off your turn, you're going to untap all of your lands, your creatures, your artifacts, anything that was tapped or used up in your last turn is now available to be used again. Then you are going to draw a card. You get one more resource from your library to put into your hand. So you'll draw that card for a turn, and then you'll move into the first of 2 different main phases. Your main phases are going to be when you can play your lands and when you can cast your spells. A spell is any non-land, right? So I know this only says creatures and sorceries on here, but you can, during your main phase, cast artifacts, battles, enchantments, planeswalkers, instants if you want to. You can cast any spell during your main phase. Um, Obviously, creatures, sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, those can only be cast on your turn and during your main phase. That's the only time we get to do it. So typically, after you draw a card, you'll take a look at your hand. Hopefully, you have a land to play for turn. So you'll play that land for turn, and then maybe you'll have something that you want to play right away. If not, no worries. You can move into your combat. If you already have creatures on the battlefield, you can declare attackers, is what we've got here. So you can tell your opponent whether your creature is going to attack them directly, or maybe a planeswalker on their side of the board if they have one, or even a battle if you played one and they're defending a battle, right? So you're not going to be able to attack other creatures directly. The way that works is, again, you can only say, I'm going to attack you, and then they can choose to block with their creatures or not. Um, then, once they declare the blockers, the combat damage happens. Any creatures that are dealt more damage than their toughness are going to die. They're going to go to the graveyard, and after combat, you'll have another chance to have a main phase. So you can then play, if you still have mana available, if you still have lands untapped, you can play your cards now. And then after that main phase, you end your turn, your creatures heal up, and then it becomes your opponent's turn. So again, this is the most basic way to look at it. You can see on the right, this is kind of a more in-depth way of looking at it. There's all of the different kind of things are addressed on the right. So if you want to pause and take a minute to read through all that, I think this is a much better and more comprehensive list of different things. Um, you'll see on the left side, it doesn't mention upkeep. It doesn't mention end step or end phase at all. Um, Usually, those are only relevant when I have cards that say during my upkeep or during your end step, do a certain thing. So those are going to be triggered abilities, is what we call it in Magic the Gathering, um, versus any of the tap abilities are what we call activated abilities. So the left side doesn't really address all of that. Again, without going too far into the weeds, if you want to take a look on the right, I'm not going to go through all of it here, but I think we got a good start on it regardless. So again, you're going to go back and forth with your opponent, taking turns playing spells and hoping that at the end of the game, you can bring their life total down to 0. There are some other forms of win conditions that we won't go into yet. If you are interested, please let me know in the comments. I can make a video just on alternative win cons or win conditions, which I think are pretty fun. But yeah, we're going to continue until somebody runs out of life. So that's the basic way that we play Magic the Gathering. Now, what kind of formats exist? Now, there's actually quite a few. This is a image I found on Reddit. I really like parts of this. I won't say all of it. I think it's a little busy, the graphic itself, but I think it gives a pretty good idea. On the top, I'll have slides for these so you don't have to worry too much about these. But on the top, you can see that those two limited formats, those are going to be the 40 card formats. And then everything else are constructed formats. That means I'm showing up to my event with a pre-built deck. Those are going to usually be 60 card formats. And then you can see the bottom, you're going to have Commander, which is the 100 card format, which is one of my favorites. So there are limited formats, there are constructed formats. Most of that middle part, everything from standard to pauper, they're all going to be 60. They're all very similar. The only difference is which cards are legal to play. And the fact that there is 30 years of Magic cards to choose from means that there's so many different kinds of decks that you can build, which is a really, really very fun way of playing it, right? But it can be kind of overwhelming if you're not restricting yourself in some sort of way. So I think most people who are getting into the constructed formats of Magic the Gathering are going to look at either standard or even modern. The formats like Legacy and Vintage are going to allow you all of the cards that have ever been printed in Magic the Gathering, which means that you can do some very crazy things. But also the price of the decks can go up a little bit. And yeah, you just have more cards that you're going to be pulling from. So it's pretty crazy. So yeah, let's look a little bit at each of these. So there are two different ways that we can play 40 card formats. These 40 card formats are, again, what we call limited. because they are going to be um, essentially I'm showing up to usually a local game store or something like that. I'm being given a number of booster packs, and the idea of the limiting factor is that I can only build my deck from those cards that I get. So I really enjoy Sealed, which on the left side you can see when you go to a pre-release, that's typically when you're going to be playing those sealed, is I get 6 booster packs. I get 1 promo card from the set, and then I have to open those up and build a 40 card deck from those cards and no other cards. Well, I will say you do get to add basic lands. Basic lands you'll always have available to you when you go to a draft or a sealed event. Um, but as far as the spells that I'm playing, it's only going to be from those packs. It's a very interesting way to play because it forces you to learn how to deck build on the fly. It You're not always going to be playing with a lot of very powerful cards, wherein in the constructed formats, you're obviously building your deck with what you consider to be some of the most powerful cards. So it in a setting with limited resources, how do you make the most of what you've got? So again, on the left is sealed, and then the picture on the right is essentially what you're going to be doing when you sit down to draft. You will open only 3 packs, but you don't get those 3 packs. You can only take 1 card at a time, and that's very much deck build on the fly. So you open your first pack, you have 15 different cards in that pack. You pick one, you pass it to the person on your left. The person on your right will eventually pass you a set of 14 cards minus the 15 minus the one that they picked, and that goes around and around until all the cards are gone. You open a second pack, you pick one at a time again. So in that format, you are picking usually because there's one basic land in each pack. You're really only getting 42 spells, sometimes less, in order to make a 40 card deck, which you usually play about 16 or 17 lands, so you only need about 23 or 24. But it's a very limiting way to build a deck. So they're very interesting formats, and those are the ones that are usually used um, when a newer set comes out. Um, in order to kind of sample what sorts of cards that they've printed. Next, we have those 60 card constructed formats. I've talked a little bit about those as well already. So yeah, the most important part of these constructed decks is that you want to build a deck to do a thing very, very well. Whereas in those sealed, in the limited 40 card decks, you could get multiple copies of a card, but you probably won't. In the constructed formats, you are going to be able to play with up to 4 copies of any card in your deck. Basic lands, again, you're allowed as many as you need. But I can play, if I'm using 23 lands for my 37 cards, I can have essentially 9 cards that I have 4 times in each. So even though there's 20 more cards than those 40 card formats, you have usually 4 of all of the important cards, and you're therefore playing a very consistent game. So as new cards come out, the meta for these formats changes. Sometimes there are cards that really enable a different deck to do some really, really annoying stuff. And then you're going to see that deck a lot, a lot, a lot. So you might go to a tournament with your deck and play 4 rounds, and you might see one deck, quote unquote, because people usually use deck lists from um, online in order to build their decks. So you might see the same deck in 2 or 3 of those rounds. Um, so sometimes you have the same deck as well. So then you have to win the mirror match. Or you have the other sort of deck, one of the other sort of decks in the meta, and hope that you built it in a way that is going to be able to really combat whatever strategy your opponent's going with. Um, yeah, so that's essentially the 60 card formats. Again, a very basic look at them. They're very, very interesting if you want to get into them. Standard is a really interesting way to jump into it because it's only going to let you play with cards from the most recent sets of Magic the Gathering. So those are the ones that have come out within the last year or two. Um, and then if you want to play with cards from all ages of Magic the Gathering, you can look at playing things like Modern, Vintage, even Pauper, which the other restriction is you can play with any common. You can't play with any uncommon or rares. So it's kind of another limiting factor of the power level of the cards as well. Finally, we have, again, what I said is one of my favorite ways to play Magic the Gathering, Commander, 100 card format. So you can see Magic over the last few years, as Commander has become more and more popular. This is a set in which you build really a 99 card deck, where your 100th card is a legendary creature, um, essentially just a big, powerful creature. Um, Not always big, but powerful creature. And the legendary creature that you choose for your deck determines which colors you are allowed to play in the rest of your deck. And you can only have, it's a singleton format, is what we call it in Magic, but you can only have one of each card in your deck, again, other than basics. Um, but whereas the 60 card format, you're allowed to have play sets or 4 copies of the same card. Um, you're only allowed one card of that name for each card in your deck. Um, because the decks are so much bigger, because you only have one copy of each card, Commander is a lot less, not always less consistent, but there's a lot more sort of randomness to it, which is one of the things that I really love about it, is that you're usually, again, going to build around a commander that's going to build you into a certain strategy, and you're going to try to do that strategy well. What's nice is you'll always have access to your commander. Um, It'll start off as if it's in your hand. You'll be able to pay it for its normal cost. And then if your commander would die or get exiled or anything, it goes back to the quote unquote command zone. And then you can recast it for more mana. So you're going to have to pay 2 mana more each time to recast it. But that means you always have access to it, which means you'll always be able to play it. So you're going to build around that commander. And the other thing is, whereas the 40 and 60 card formats are almost always one against one. There's one kind of like um, dual dragon sort of format with 60 card decks where you're playing with a teammate. But all of those are one-on-one. Commander is a usually 4-player free-for-all. So you're building a deck that you're trying to beat not one, not two, but 3 people at the same time. And it gets to be a very political game. And these sorts of things that happen in the game can be really, really interesting. So um, each game is very singular, not only because you're not going to get the same cards every time, but you're probably not playing against the same commanders, the same decks, um, each time you go about playing a game. And again, because there are so many cards in Magic and Commander lets you play with almost every card ever printed, there are so many different strategies, so many different ways that you can go about building your deck, and you get to see some really, really cool stuff. So this is one of my favorite ways to play the game. Magic the Gathering Wizards of the Coast has put out more and more of these. You'll see on the left side of your screen these pre-constructed commander decks, which are a moderately inexpensive way to get into the format. The power level of the commander decks, the pre-constructed commander decks, is not always very high, but you can usually find if you go to a game store and let them know that you're playing with a pre-constructed deck, you can usually find people who also have precons with them. I try to keep at least 1 or 2 precons with me anytime I go to play, because I really relish the opportunity to just sit down with a new group of people anytime I'm playing Commander and want to make sure that we can all have fun during the game. There is a sort of subgenre of Commander, if you will, called competitive EDH, CEDH, where you are playing highly tuned, highly optimized decks and trying to win very, very quickly. I prefer to do kind of a slow grind, political, everybody's going to get to play their deck and everybody's going to get to have their deck do some things. Um, so I prefer that sort of um, gameplay to just we play 4 or 5 turns maybe, and then somebody has an infinite combo and wins. Um, but I think it's a really interesting format as well, so I don't want to sound like I'm discounting it. It's just that my preference is to sit there and grind a little bit. Um, so yeah, that's what I will say about that. But the other kind of distinguishing factor of Commander, you can see on the bottom right, is sort of a middle of a game for a Commander here, and you can see that um, the life totals are actually all over 20. You actually start with 40 life in Commander because there are so many people, because it's usually a little bit of a slower format than a lot of those constructed formats. You do get to start with more life, and it kind of allows for you to maybe start a little slow and then ramp up towards the end and make things happen. Um, so yeah, it's just a really interesting format. But that's all the formats. That's a good amount about the gameplay. I really hope that that has helped you get a good feel on how Magic the Gathering works in general. I really hope that you've enjoyed these videos. If you're looking for something to do next, I already have the color videos. That would be a great resource to see kind of a next step as far as what does each color do, because each color has its own sort of niche that it tries to do, its strengths and weaknesses. So go check those out. I'll have other videos coming onto my page sporadically as I dive deeper and deeper into this conversation. But I wanted to give you a few of my favorite content creators for Magic the Gathering here. Tolarian Community College will give you access to almost anything Magic the Gathering that you could dream of. They do have some really good introductory material if you're looking to get more into the rules and different things like that. Um, I would also recommend the second one there if you're looking for some of the rules and interactions, especially if you're an advanced player. I think he does a phenomenal job of doing that. But then the last one there is something that I don't think I will really delve into. I really love Cass Wiley uh, because he has a fantastic knowledge of everything Magic the Gathering, but he'll also talk about the lore. And it's something I've not really delved into. There are stories that are printed about each of the sets, and one of the things that I do enjoy is going and watching his reaction to things that happen in the story. And it's always fun to hear him talk about things like what the latest between Jace and Chandra is, different things like that, right? So those are some of my favorite people to watch, but I do hope that you will continue to watch these videos as they come out, and I just so appreciate you taking the time to watch these. So have a great day. Thanks. Bye bye.